Is that all my peeps? Y'all all here tonight? Hey, how you doing, Caroline? Hey, Tanya. Hey, Jeff. How are you? Linda? Alicia's
Barely
under
here.
the weather tonight. Hope she gets to feeling better. Prayers for her. Hey, Amy. How are you? There's Maggie. Oh, boy. Well, it warmed up a little bit, but it's raining. I don't know which I like least, the cold weather or the wet weather. Um, but it's a good day to be alive, so I won't complain too much. All right. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. You know me, I'm long-winded. We don't want to go too late into the night. All righty, let me get all my stuff situated here. Got all my notes, get everything set. Are we recording? Oh yeah, share my screen and we'll get after it. All right, so all right, so we're at week 3. And so if we look at our weekly schedule, this last week, we were looking at a field trip policy. And so here's some things that caught my eye. Caroline talked about incomplete policies. Unfortunately, you'll find that a lot. That's a good catch, Caroline. It's a good reminder for all of us that we think that all this stuff is just completely laid out for us like we want it to be. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it is. Let me move that out of the way. I don't know why that's doing that. Let me get that out of the way so I can see. And so that's a good reminder. So I had already in our under week 3, I had this right here where it says J. Tinsley field trip. This has got everything that you need to know about field trip planning pretty much. And if your district doesn't have all, you need to kind of put it together for yourself like Jackie did. She was at an early college. She's since taken a bigger, better job, but she was AP at an early college. And you know, they're notoriously loose and goosey. Don't have policies. Kids run around. They're usually just a disaster. And so she put her own together. So if I can find it right here, and she went through and talked about all the authorization, parental notice, costs, student safety and discipline, transportation, other accommodations, chaperones, volunteers, non-sponsored. And so she put together a good one. I'm going to talk about chaperones here again in a minute, but here's a really good one. If your policy is incomplete, I'd look over this one. Make sure you can pull together all these different resources if you can, to help you with this thing. They are high risk endeavors. Back to this. Carolina talked about calling parents from the accident site. Don't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's a good catch on her part. Don't do that. You should be giving aid to kids. There's a Good Samaritan law that would protect you if you're trying to give first aid. Now, if you take out your pocket knife and cut a hole in one of them's windpipe, trying to do a tracheotomy, I don't think you'd be covered on that. But you should be giving first aid to kids after you've contacted the police, waiting on law enforcement. Don't confer with the driver, because that could be seen as collusion or a story. The police will handle the driver. They'll drug test them and do all that. But you know, one of the things that I worry about when calling parents is every kid's got a cell phone. You jam the comm center at the school, incorrect information gets out. Let public information handle that. Megan talked about be prepared. Her district, the bus garage, calls parents with public information. You'll get that. Danya talked about cell phones cause panic. They absolutely do. And then Jeff talked about chaperones. Now, I'm going to tell you my story on chaperones. I'll tell it on myself. So if we look under tonight's lesson, why in the world do I have a screenshot? How would I have known how to found such a needle in a haystack that on June 9th, Thursday, June 9th, 1988, the day before school was out on June 10th, that there was an EF1 tornado just south of Asheboro, North Carolina. How do I know that? Well, unfortunately, I was in the middle of it because of a chaperone. I was a middle school principal, but back in those days in middle school, disgusting children, by the way. The day before, whatever the graduating group, the eighth graders, you threatened them all spring long that they wouldn't get to go on the class field trip. They didn't behave, trying to get some control over them. And the day before school was out, every spring you took them on a field trip. And you told them not to show up the next day at school because you knew they'd tear the place down. And so I took our group to the zoological park at Asheboro. And I, against my better judgment, allowed a non-custodial parent, which means an irresponsible parent, to be a chaperone of a group of girls and included her daughter. At 2 o'clock, sirens went off at the park to clear the park, and they decided they wanted to ride the trolley around the park one more time. I got everybody out to the buses. You know that with the parking for tour buses is nearly a mile from the entrance. We all collected up. I got them all out there. I had to run back. I'll guarantee you I ran that mile in a little over 5 minutes. I was at a dead sprint, got back, and trying to find them. They were on the trolley. I got everybody back to the bus just as the tornado hit us. How it didn't turn the bus over, it knocked down trees. It was just carnage. We were right in the middle of it. And I vowed from that day forward that I would never let my heart overrule my head again, and never allow a parent or anybody else that wasn't a school system employee, and a good one, be a chaperone on a field trip. I made that mistake. I honestly did. You can see it right there on the screen in front of you. I was there that day, and I was in charge. It was my responsibility. And a chaperone nearly killed us all. So little things like that, you better be thinking about that. I mean, anybody with half a lick of sense, I'm talking about myself now, would have known that a non-custodial mother is probably not a very responsible adult. I hate to be pejorative, but that's just the truth. But I was the nitwit that let her be in charge. I never made that mistake ever again. I never took a parent on a field trip ever again. Or if they went, they were just a visitor. They were never in charge. Only paid people would be in charge as a chaperone, somebody that I've trained and I know is going to do what I want them to do. But yes, that's a big one. So that's a good catch by Jeff. You better know who your chaperones are, and you better have them coached up as well. Liz talked about duties, liability, negligence. Pointed out that sometimes the insurance carrier, there's a $3,000 limit on liability on school insurance, like on accidents on a field trip. What happens if the parent gets a doctor bill for $10,000? They try to sue you for the remainder. That's what that means. So even though you may not be negligent, misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance in any way, that don't mean that they won't sue you when the doctor bill comes, because there is usually a $3,000 limit on liability for insurance companies, medical on a field trip. And so they'll come after you. You better make sure that you've done all the things that you needed to do. Now, Randy made a good point. One of the problems with field trips is kids feel like they're not in school, that the rules don't apply anymore on field trips. Now, if you're a high school person and your DECA group will take a field trip this year and they'll all be drunk, they'll be drinking. It's just a law. DECA students on a field trip have to drink every time. It's just standard in the business. You just got to know that. Certain groups get into certain trouble, but they all think that the rules don't apply. You have to make sure that they understand the rules do apply when they're not in school. Adam pointed out foreseeability. That's the standard when you go to court. It used to be called the reasonable man standard. Now it's called the reasonable person standard, or foreseeability. A reasonable person can foresee that if you got a bunch of 16 through 18 years olds on a field trip and you're not monitoring them, that they would drink. Or that if you let kids wander along, out of the Discovery Place downtown in Charlotte, that they're going to get in trouble out on the street downtown in Charlotte. That you can't let them come out by themselves, or tell them that they can go to lunch on their own in downtown Charlotte. When you can go out the backside and be over in Fourth Ward in a minute where you don't want to be. yeah, that would not, that any reasonable person could foresee that if you let kids go to lunch on their own downtown Charlotte, that's going to be a disaster waiting to happen. So that's the standard of foreseeability. I love what Kristen said, and I love what uh, um, they all mentioned this, but Alicia, I like what she said. Alicia said, if kids go to the hospital, you're going to the hospital. You got to be with them. That's a liability issue. If somebody in your field trip is hurt or injured and they have to go to the hospital, you got to go with them. Make sure that you understand that and that you haven't planned something else right after that, or you're meeting somebody, or you're going to leave and meet some friend for lunch downtown while your kids are at Discovery Place or at the Mint Museum. No, you're going to be right with them. And if one of them gets hurt and has to go to the hospital, you're going with them. That was a good call by Alicia. Yeah, Glenda pointed out, and I like that she pointed out that sometimes policies and guidelines aren't specific enough. Reasonable standards of care. Talked about Good Samaritan. You got to provide them care. Amy said you got to pray a lot. I like that. Prayer helps. That was a good catch. That's a good catch. Let me. Getting an echo here, so I better mute everybody. Tanya said her district, they have them carry the health cards of the kids. That's a good idea. Amy pointed out the limit of $3,000 on liability for insurance. That means you're going to get sued. Jasmine talked about keeping your plans updated and your comms getting overloaded. Tamala was our OMA star of the week. I had that down. Task 3, and she's at Task 3, and they and discussion board 4. Some of the others are there. And then, so our stars of the week are Alicia and Glenda, Jeff, Tamala. I like, again, when I point these out, you can go back and read your classmates' posts. I don't require you to read anything, but these are the ones that catch my eye. And then Jasmine, I really like what she had to say about, she talked about 2 cases at her school. And let's talk about those for a minute. I won't burden you with details, but Jasmine talked about 2 separate incidents that occurred at her school. In terms of negligence. One, a lawsuit and a teacher being suspended and charged based on trying to restrain or remove a kid from a situation. Now, that one probably would fall under misfeasance. You did the wrong thing unintentionally. And the other one was a teacher slapped a kid. Now that would be malpractice. That's malicious. That's against the law. Now on the first one, you might lose in court on a civil case for unlawful restraint or being overly aggressive, but it's not criminal. The second one is criminal, by the way. And you could spend some time in jail. And it reminds me of what happened at McClintock Middle School in Charlotte. The principal, I won't mention his name, he bounced a kid off a locker and hurt the kid up pretty good, broke a couple of ribs, just, because he could. He not only lost his job and lost a big civil case, he also got some time in the pokey. I think he got 30 days. For serious assault with injury. You break a couple ribs and puncture a kid's lung, that's a pretty serious deal. So remembering our standards of negligence, misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance. Nonfeasance, you had a duty to act and you didn't. Malfeasance, you did the wrong thing. You weren't intent in being wrong, but you did the wrong thing. But the biggie is malfeasance. Malicious. You intentionally did the wrong thing. That one will not only be civil, that one will be criminal. In that case, that teacher, according to Jasmine's already been dismissed, and there's going to be legal trouble behind that. So the least of her worries. Now, question is, and the reason I brought this up, what is your liability as principal? You better have trained these people, and in your handbook, your code of conduct for teachers, gone over these things, just like our first case study. You better have gone over the grading scale. Are you going to be in court with them? If you can't prove that you told them not to, and that you went over your code of conduct that says no corporal punishment, those kinds of things, then you're going to get sued along with them as well. Now, you can be let out of the case, or you can be found, not guilty on the case, even if the teacher is convicted, if you can prove that you did what you were supposed to do. So that's the big thing on liability is you got to be where you're supposed to be doing what you're supposed to do. And I just use field trips as an example of something that sounds simple, but there's a lot of things that we do in school that seem simple, but there's a lot more to it, a lot more planning, preparation, knowing the policies, the codes. That's the kind of stuff that'll slip up and get you. So those are the things that caught my eye this week. Again, I am pleased with your work. So let's talk about the OMA. I am not pleased with my instruction of the OMA. Obviously, I've missed some. So I want to cover the part that I've missed and not done a very good job on. So when we look at all the elements of task one, it's the last element that we're not doing the best job on that we need to focus on a little better. And I will do that right now. All right. So when we're looking at that last element of the OMA, the contextual analysis clearly describes the school's budgeting process and procedures. Not just what is the budget, what is the process of the budget? Specifically, we want to know what role the school improvement team plays in developing the local school budget, the money you get from the local and the money you raise at your school that you have control of at your school building. How is that? What is the process for budgeting? Is the school improvement team involved in that budgeting process? Now, here's the reason why. The law says that you have to have a school improvement team and that they have to develop a school improvement plan every year. That school improvement plan has your academic initiatives. That's what you did last semester in the APSEL. You did your most pressing need from your standardized test scores. You have to do that every year for real as a principal. That is your school improvement and becomes the major part of your school improvement plan. Now, you are supposed to, that triangle on the front of that slideshow that I have on master scheduling, the school improvement plan is at the top. What support the cornerstones that support that academic school improvement plan are the budget and the master schedule. The only way that we can be sure that those initiatives those academic initiatives of that school improvement plan are being met is if that school improvement team is involved in the budgeting process. Otherwise, it's a crapshoot. We don't know if what good does it do to identify math as our most pressing need and then we divide the money up equally among all departments? That's not budgeting. Or we buy SKIS kits for science, but our math was our initiative. And then we're surprised at the end of the year when our math scores are still the same. That's what we're talking about here, that this closes the loop on that triangle, that process. Again, at the top of that, let me pull up that PowerPoint. At the top of that triangle is the school improvement plan. The master schedule and the school budget must support that school improvement plan. That's the law. It's not Dale's opinion. That's why we have to check to make sure that that school improvement team is sitting at the table during that budgeting process to make sure that that school improvement plan, the academic initiatives that you identified last semester, are being funded, and that the master schedule supports those initiatives as well. I think Dr. Hamilton on our coaching night talked about looking at test scores and school improvement plan. If you've got an extra teacher, or if you've got, and you've decided to determine which grade level to put that teacher in, you go with the initiative from your school improvement plan and where your majority of your test scores are. That's what we're talking about with the master schedule. We're making sure it's aligned with all these things. We make sure that our federal programs are scheduled first because they're the most restrictive, that we're meeting all the state laws and policies from the General Assembly, State Board of Education, Department of Public Instruction on length of time, number of courses, hours, days, and then the local board, are we doing block schedule? Are we doing AB day? That kind of thing. And then our performance data, making sure we have the teachers teach the right courses, and then doing teacher input. So when we get to task 3, this is what we're going to look at when we either modify our existing schedule or we got recommendations for a new schedule. They're based on these things. So if we look at that, right here is task 2 guidance on how to copy and paste your AppTel into 2. But right here in 3, you'll be looking at but not just to assess the strengths and weaknesses of the process. Are we starting with our federal programs? Are we starting with teacher input? Which are we supposed to start with? We're supposed to start with our federal programs. Do we make sure that we're calculating that EBOS data? Are we putting the right teachers with the right kids? And so here's some guidance on that. Here's how to do right here. I won't bother to read this to you. This tells you exactly how to do. Task 2 is a 5-minute process of copy and paste. Take the old labels off, drop these under the element headings. Off you go on task 2. It takes you 5 minutes to do it. And then 3, start looking at this. Look at that rationale. What is the process in your school? Do we start with teacher input or do we start with federal programs? And then look at your existing schedule and either modify it or make suggestions to come up with a new one, make suggestions that would better fit, a law, a policy would better support our initiatives from our school improvement plan. That's why I had you find it. What are the initiatives in it? So that's our guidance. Again, the biggie is on making sure that when you talk about this last element in task 1, that you talk about the process and the involvement of the school. Now, if you say, well, there isn't any. Well, then just say they don't have any. You don't have to, do an editorial on that. Just tell us what it is. And again, on 3 right here, this is what you do in 3. You assess the current scheduling procedure strengths and areas for improvement, alignment with school improvement team findings, ongoing lead teacher collaborative planning. That's your state law. Make sure that's been done. Diverse and exceptional populations, making sure that they come first in that. Evidence of input from the faculty. And then use these findings to revise your current schedule. You do a graphic of the new schedule. It's pretty simple. Just go through those steps. It's pretty simple. All right. And I think I pulled up an example. School budgeting process right here's one. Title 1 funding. And she went through all this stuff. But really all I want to know is participation of the school improvement team. And she says, they run the process for the budget. That's all we want to know. Participation of the school improvement team in developing the local budget. That's what we want to know. Are they involved or aren't they involved? All right, so that covers all of those things. I want to talk about case studies that we'll do next week. And so case study 1 materials. Here's your directions. You answer these prompts. Here's the case itself. And then I've got a couple of things here. Now, I've got the North Carolina Athletic Handbook for middle schools and high schools, and I've got no tolerance expulsion. So I want to talk about both of those. I want to talk about this case. Now, so that we won't be in an argument next week, and I won't hurt your feelings any more than I normally do. I'm pretty tough on case study 9. This is a case of a teacher going rogue. The principal is not at fault. The superintendent is not at fault. They both did exactly what they were supposed to do, exactly according to the law. What does the law say? You report things to the superintendent and the school board. When you're going to exclude a kid for a year, you better tell the superintendent that a teacher has tried to do that. That's better be the first call you make. Now, the superintendent said, well, just be careful. It's a highly political situation. You said, well, it's his fault. He should have said, what's the law say? Who does the law say grades and classifies students? The principal, not the superintendent. No superintendent that knows anything will ever tell you what grade to give a kid because that's against the law. And they can be held liable for doing such a thing as that. It is not a principal problem. It is not a superintendent problem. First case study is a teacher problem. Now we'll have a superintendent problem later on, and we'll have a principal problem later on. But this is not the case study for that. This is simply a teacher went rogue. At the beginning of the year, every year you have a mandatory teacher work day. In that you cover the teacher handbook. And that is the grading policy for the district. It's based on the state law that comes straight from the State Board of Education. That law says in North Carolina that final exam counts, the state exam, EOC or EOG counts 30% of the grade. In South Carolina, the quarterlies count 10, and SC Ready, the final exam counts 20. So again, SC Ready testing is 30 in aggregate, and so is EOC, EOG in North Carolina. It also says that homework in aggregate for the entire year can't count more than 10%. Out of class assignments in aggregate for the year can't count more than 10% of the final grade. That leaves 50%, and that's divided equally between classwork, participation, and teacher-made tests. And that's that 50%, your district figures out how they want that 50 to be allotted between those three items. Usually it's 20, 20, and 10. Usually it's 20% on teacher-made tests, 10% on assignments, and 20% on assignments and 10% on in-class participation. Usually 10 participation rarely is more than 10%. Tests and assignments are 20 each. Participation is 10. State testing is 30. And homework is 10. That's generally how. But your district sets that policy. The first case study, the teacher made one homework assignment. Oh, you say, well, yeah, but it was an out of class. It doesn't matter. If you call it homework, it's 10% in aggregate. If you call it an out of class assignment, still 10% in aggregate. Doesn't matter. It can only count 10%. Every one of them that you give for the whole year in aggregate can only count 10%. She took one take-home assignment, whatever you want to call it, homework, or took one assignment, made it count more than 50% of the yearly grade and failed the kid. Well, federal law says that's a zero tolerance expulsion. That's illegal under federal law, equal protection of the law under the 14th Amendment. You have, what you have done is given the most punishment you can give a kid is a year exclusion. Even a kid that brings a gun and shoots somebody after a year can apply to come back. But you put a kid out. A kid could have brought a gun, could have done anything short of shooting somebody and got less punishment than turning in his brother's homework paper. So federal law says you have done an illegal zero tolerance expulsion. So the idea is, what are you going to do? And don't be that idiot that says, well, I'll support her in public, but privately I'll tell her not to do that again. Do you remember when you were a kid? And I'll use Amy. When you were a kid and your mother said to you, if Sally jumped off the roof, would you jump off too? That's what this is. If the teacher is risking her house and her livelihood, do you want to do that with yours as well? No, you can't support her publicly, privately, in any way. She's done a zero tolerance expulsion. That's against federal law and state law. She's broke the state law on grading. She's broken your district policy on grading. She has done a federal out of school year-long expulsion with no hearing, no due process whatsoever. Since 1969, and when we cover court cases in just a minute, since 1969, public school kids have due process now. Unfortunately for me, I was already out of elementary school by then. They used to just grab us up like that, like Foghorn Leghorn in that cartoon used to grab that dog up and just wear him out. That's what they used to do us in elementary school all the time. We got no due process. They just beat the snot out of you. He needed it. He probably did something. Yeah. The standard now in due process is arbitrary and capricious. So what are those two standards? Me and Tanya are out back at the gym smoking. Smoking's bad for you. I'm not a smoker, but it's pretty bad for you. And Caroline comes along, and she's the AP, and she catches us. She tells Tanya to go back to class. And then she just pulls out a gun and shoots me, graveyard dead. She has violated both standards of due process under the law, arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary in that she punished me and not Tanya for doing exactly the same thing. And capricious is, I didn't read your code of conduct, but I'm pretty sure it doesn't say you can shoot Dale for smoking. Seems a little excessive to me. So your code of conduct, when we look at the state disciplinary data guide for North or South Carolina. It doesn't say what punishment is. It just says what the infractions are and all the rules and laws that go along with them. Your local Board of Education must develop a code of conduct that sets parameters, and we'll cover this on that night when we do discipline, sets parameters. But the idea is you can't go above that. You can't give more than the handbook calls for. And I have a story about Booger from Revenge of the Nerds that I'll tell that night. But the notion here is the standard is arbitrary and capricious. The teacher violated both standards of the law, gave the kid no due process. He didn't get to bring a witness. He didn't get to tell his side of the story. She put him out of school for a year. Going to fail the kid for a year. So the question is what are you going to do? What are you going to do with her? And we'll have a big debate about that next week. Because, you know, all of y'all are soft-hearted and better people than I am, and y'all just want to put her on an action plan. And, you know, I want to do more than that, but we'll talk about that next week. So that's your case. Make sure that you have a little PowerPoint that goes with it. Everybody needs to be here on case study night and take your turns, and then we'll hash this out. Now, the first group that goes, somebody will email me or text me about midday on Monday or Tuesday, wanting to be the first team. And that'd be wonderful. I always like, because the first team, y'all the ones that get wore out. Before the semester's out, all of you will have to go one time first, because I wear the first crowd out. After that, when we get the blood up, it goes pretty smoothly after the first group. But we'll have
try not to cry.
Yeah.
I'll try not to cry.
Yeah. I got so tickled. In the fall of the year, I do a block for the EDCI ladies. Now, the EDCI are the doctoral and curriculum instruction, and they're the finest ladies ever. Smart, good writers, but they're not school administrators. They're just, I'm married to an EDCI lady. For 40 years, I've been married to one of those ladies. I have being married to one, I just appreciate them so much, but they're not school administrators. They come and stay with me for a semester, do a 12-hour block and try to get so they can pass their exam. There's a quirk in the law in North and South Carolina that the EDCI ladies, to get licensed as curriculum instruction specialists, have to take the administrative praxis 5412. Well, they don't have a clue. So they spend a semester with me in the fall where I get them, do 601 and 603 with them to get them ready to pass the exam. And so at graduation, now they're all either ADD, all but dissertation. Some of them have already finished their dissertation. Some of them are already doctors when I get them. So Stacy Fuentes, who lives in Grassy Pond, which is just across the state line out of Bowling Springs, it's like 5 minutes from the school. Stacy teaches in Gaffney, and at graduation, she hugged me. Comes up to about here on me. She hugged me and said, they were all texting me the night we did that first case study not to cry in front of you. And I was like, why would you cry? I said, my feelings were hurt so much. And I was like, Lord, I didn't get wound up on you on that one. So if your feelings get hurt, I'll apologize before we start next week. Hopefully you're not as tender as the EDCI ladies. If you want to be an administrator, you're going to have to toughen up a little bit. But we'll have a good time. It'll be a lot of fun. But our cases have varied topics, but the bad guys, it's the teacher in the first one, but it won't always be the teacher. So don't feel like you have to stick up for your tribe. You need to look at these things realistically in terms of what you should do or not do, and did they follow the law, and did they follow the ethical paradigm? You need to judge their actions versus the law and what we should do ethically as school administrators. We can't forget that part as well. So that will be our first case study next week. I'm looking forward to that. So I do want us to look quickly before we go to court cases, because it will help us at the disciplinary data manual that I introduced the first week. We'll go over it more. But one of the things I want to reiterate from that as we go through court cases here, let me get to the right one here. When we talk about no child left behind, so that it will make more sense to you, there's two statutes within No Child Left Behind, which came in 2001, that are really penal toward school administrators, and you need to understand them. The two standards in No Child Left Behind is that no child has to go to a low performing school, or no child has to go to a persistently dangerous school. Everybody understands low performing. Nobody generally has ever heard of the statute about persistently dangerous. So there are 16, now 17, it varies back and forth. There are 17 acts of crime and violence identified by the federal government. They're on the screen right now. Now, not all of these count against you. Only the acts of violence count against you. You say, well, Dale, how would I know which of those are acts of crime and which were right here? When you put an incident in Power School and you have to report every incident, don't be that idiot that thinks, well, if I don't suspend the kid, I don't have to report it. If you have a written or a verbal referral, it goes into Power School. What you do is not, it does not, we report incidents, not outcomes. That you suspend conference doesn't matter. It goes in Power School. And let me say this, and I'm going to say it twice. There is no major, there is no minor. There is no major, there is no minor. We have schools that edit their data by not putting what they call minor infractions in. That is not in the law. The law says you report everything that goes on in your building. Everything. Even if all you did was conference the kid, it goes in. Now, if there is a PD prefix in front of the description of the behavior, then that means it's going to count against your persistently dangerous calculation for the year. Now, don't be that dumb person. Like I had a principal one time, and when I said, you get 5 per 1,000 kids of these incidents. That's the standard. And they said, well, that won't affect us. We don't have 1,000 kids. No, it's a percentage. It's a half percentage. That means 1 for every 200 kids. That's the standard. If you exceed the standard, which is 0.5% or 1 for every 200 kids. So if you've got 1,000 kids, that would be 5. If you've got 500 kids, that would be, if you hit your third one, then you've exceeded the limit. First year you exceed the limit on persistently dangerous, you go on a watch list. The state comes out and does a really extensive audit. They use that one that assessment inventory. I adapted it from theirs years ago for Charlotte. They come out, and if you pass your audit, you get a second year. You're just on the watch list the first year. At the end of the second year, one of two things has to happen. Either the kids get bused to another school that's not persistently dangerous, or we change administration, just like low performance, except it's quicker. So this is about your job now. You say, well, I just won't report this stuff. You get caught not reporting, that's criminal. That's not only civil. You'll lose your job. You may lose your freedom. Or underreporting. Or I had a case of one of the small school principals put one in, kid got excluded, serious assault with a weapon, and then she didn't realize that because he got excluded for a year, he'd get an automatic board appeal. And she went back in and took it out and changed it to something lesser so it wouldn't count against her calculation. We caught her that way. That was her last day. Or you'll underreport it. I had a situation at one of the public efforts in Charlotte Morgan School for the violent kids. Behavior modification technician got his arm caught in the door, struggling to get a kid in one of the panic rooms, tore his arm out of socket. I mean, tore it out. Problem is when he went and filed his workman's comp, it was denied because the principal had reported as assault without injury. Assault on school personnel, not serious, so it wouldn't count. It would be, as you can see on the screen, it's an RO rather than assault with serious injury, which is a PD. She said, well, I didn't want it to count against us. Man can't use his arm. He was out of work for a year, had multiple surgeries, and you reported that as no injury. And he got his workman comp denied. Of course, we got sued and lost that one. We had to pay him a big settlement. We didn't even go to court because we didn't want to be the bad guy. We knew the news media would get a hold of that one, and we'd all look like turds that we were for doing something that stupid. We deserved to have to pay. So you better tell the truth. You say, well, how do I know if it fits? They have embarrassingly specific, detailed definitions of all these things, especially the sexual ones in the back of the book. I'm an old Baptist, so I'm not going to read them to you, but there's no doubt A reasonable person can read that and know if the incident that happened on the school. But what happens is we have buyer's remorse. When we get the blood up out of the hall and we got hit during the fight or whatever happened, and when our eye, the swelling goes down where we can see out of our eye, our lip, the swelling goes down. We think, at the time, you know what it was, but in a couple of days, like over the weekend, you get buyer's remorse. You want to change it, don't. It is what it was. You get caught decriminalizing things, you get caught hiding things, not putting them in, it will not go well for you. If you get into this business of using third-party software like Educator Handbook in order to edit your data, you get caught doing that, you will lose your job and your license. This one carries a statute that automatically removes your license from ever working in public school again if you get caught doing any of that stuff. It says so in the handbook. Jeffrey, I'll go to you first for questions, comments.
With the disruptive behavior and the incidents reporting, is that for the entire student population or is that by demographics?
Everybody. We're going to talk about EC in just a minute. We have this notion if we have an EC kid that we shouldn't have to report their stuff. No. If it happens at your campus, here's the thing. I'll give you one. A car's running down the street and police are chasing him. He wrecks his car on a school campus, gets out, and he's got a gun. Do you have to report that? Absolutely. It happened on your school campus. Over the Thanksgiving holiday, when I was principal at Eastway on the east side of town, junior high, somebody pulled a car underneath the walkway from the auxiliary gym over to the classroom building, the 900 building, and set it on fire. I had to report burning of a school building. Yeah, if it happens on your campus, you have to own it. EC kid, doesn't matter. You have to own it. You have to report.
But the account, because I talked to my principal about that too, because she said that if you have one out of one in the system, that would be 100% of that student group. That
it doesn't go. It goes by the number of kids in your building.
Okay.
It goes by the number of kids in your building. If you've got 500 kids and 50 of them are EC, it doesn't count. We don't separate them. It goes by your total enrollment as defined by the state. When you look at your report card and it says how many students you got, that's what's used for that calculation. Yeah. Danya, you've got one?
Yeah, who quantifies like how serious an injury is
You
to
do.
make it so well, as the administrator?
Yes, you got it's your responsibility. The principal is ultimately responsible for the elements of the handbook. And it says so in the opening introduction and for that reason, at the back of that handbook, they have provided you a handy dandy guide that is very specific, especially on the sexual stuff. And you have to do that. So, serious injury, if in a court of law, if you've had surgery, that's a serious injury. If you've missed more than 3 days of work, that would be a serious injury. You know that, job abandonment in North and South Carolina is 3 days. After 3 days, you can be terminated for job abandonment. So if you have to use up all of your days for an injury, that would be considered a serious injury. The threshold there is 3. But that's a great question from Danya. So I'll go back to that. I'll let you see that part right now. Let me share my screen. Come on now. All right. So in the very back of the book, if I can move some of this stuff out of the way, and I'll turn my camera back on now that I've got it to do what I want it to do. In the very back of the book, it's got a detailed description of all these things in the back. Right here, as you can see, it's got it all back here in the back. Now, it's got all your action types, in terms of what you do. It's got all that stuff. And let's see, let me go back up. Right here, all behavior types. Assault resulting assault is defined in general. See right here for more detail. They even give you scenarios. And if you can read and are a reasonable person, you ought to get it right. That's what I'm talking about. They even have links and scenarios and guidelines, and that's what I'm talking about. The sexual stuff gets really graphic, by the way, more than I want to read, but it's right here. You can't say that I misinterpreted or I didn't know or I made my best guess. Then they would question your judgment as a professional educator if you can't follow this. But if you've got somebody who misses work for a year and has multiple surgeries, that would be considered a serious injury. And she admitted, I just put that down because I didn't think anybody would look. I didn't think there'd be any repercussions because I didn't want it to count against us. Well, that was all well and good until the HR department and CMS denied his workman's comp claim because they said your supervisor reported that you weren't seriously injured, that you should have been back to work the next day. And part of that function too in North Carolina and South Carolina is pretty much the same. North Carolina, for state employees, there is no long-term disability. It's only short-term, and you have to go to the doctor every month. They make it really hard to collect your disability. They make it really hard to collect your workman's comp. And so if on the employee, there's a lot of attorneys out there that make good money helping those people suing districts, and because the state really won't help those people out, it's up to the district to do the right thing. And so there's a lot of watchdog groups that watch school systems specifically for misbehavior like that. Because you can't put, that guy was out of work for a year. He couldn't put in for disability for a year. He can only get it for 30 days at a time, have to go back to the doctor, have to be reassessed. They make it really difficult on state employees when they're injured on the job. They make it really difficult on them. The state does. And so if the local is being an idiot, you generally get worn out. As they should. We should look after our people if they're hurt in the discharge of their duties. We should be looking after them. But that's a great question. But yeah, they've got all the statutes. Those links get really graphic and long, and they give you scenarios on reporting and the whole thing. It's all right there. The big thing is if you're an ethical person, and that's one of the reasons why we judge all of our case studies on the ethical paradigms of character, treat, profession, and justice. Those are the four ethical paradigms: character, keep, profession, justice, that we judge them. Because not only do you need to learn the law, you need to make sure that you are ethical in your application of it. This is what we're talking about. That you're not looking at that statute and saying, oh, No Child Left Behind says persistent dangerous school. I could get in real trouble if I report that, versus I better do the right thing. So let's look at our court cases. Let me share my screen. So what I have put together for you, a quick and dirty list of the court cases that define modern education and define school law in the modern era. When did the modern era start? 1954. Write that down. It started in 1954 with Brown versus the Board of Education, which was a case before the Supreme Court that reversed the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson decision that said separate was okay. What did Brown say in 54? Said separate was not equal and no longer would be the law of the land, that we would integrate schools with all deliberate haste. And what happened for the next 12 years? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I started school in segregated schools. I remember clearly Civil Rights Act of 65, and then the next year in 1966, We started integrating schools across the United States of America. I remember in North Carolina when the first load of kids came to our school. So we started consolidating and closing schools, but I was in school when integration started. What triggered it was the Civil Rights Act of 65, and integration started in 66. We did nothing for 12 years except fight it. Not our finest hour. North Carolina, being a bunch of bigots that they were back then and probably still are now, they said, you know, we don't like this, we don't support it. So our response to that is we'll do it, but we're going to exit capital funding. So what does that mean? In 1966, in the state of North Carolina, the state stopped funding the building or upkeep of all school facilities. It became the purview and the responsibility of the local school district to build and maintain their buildings. School boards are unempowered, so they have to go to county commissioners, and it comes from the local property tax and business tax. That's what pays for schools in terms of the buildings and the upkeep. The state does not give you money to build a building or keep your buildings up. They stopped in 66. Now, they didn't stop building schools. North Carolina just kept on building them hand over fist. We have 58 community and technical colleges with multiple campuses. We got 140 campuses, and we need about 14, and we got 140. And they're all 50 to 60 years old. They're out of date, no technology. They're just big white elephants sitting everywhere with no students in them. I mean, the people who ran this state were the construction people, Powell out of Raleigh and Spangler out of Charlotte back in those years. They kept on building schools, but not for public schools because they were bigots. They didn't want schools to integrate. They wanted to make it hard for schools to integrate, and that's what they did. Not a good thing. The first iteration of ISA, Elementary and Secondary School Act, that continues today, started in 1965. It provided titles 1 through 9. Everybody knows what Title 1 is: support from at-risk kids in reading and math, and Title 9 is gender equity and all the titles in between. As I told you earlier, what shapes how we have to deal with due process in the modern world happened during the Vietnam War in 69. When a Supreme Court case, Tinker versus the School Board of Tinker of Des Moines, Iowa, said that kids get due process rights for the first time ever. Too late for me. As I said earlier, by that time, but prior to then, they just jerk you up whenever they wanted to. But now you get to give your side of the story. They have to present the evidence against you. They can't treat you arbitrarily and capriciously. You get all the due process rights. The next thing that changed the face of schools was 2 years later. It was actually a Charlotte case, but it was a national case argued before the Supreme Court by Julius Chambers, North Carolina native, former civil rights attorney and former president of North Carolina Central and Durham, with the Swan decision that said that districts had to bus to integrate schools. Happened in 71. That was the law of the land for 30 years. Now, in 2001, the Capuchon case, again, it had to go back to CMS. The case to try to overturn it had to come from the same district as Swan. So a guy moved into Charlotte, a complete carpetbagger, just to file the case. He was from California, had a child, so he had standing, filed the case, and of course, Swan was overturned after 30 years. Now, I was in the central office in Charlotte at that time. I predicted it would take 2 or 3 years for schools to resegregate. I was completely wrong. It took 2 or 3 weeks. It's like that 30 years, within a month, it was like that 30 years never happened. I was amazed at how fast schools resegregated. But that's what Swan was in 71, but it lasted for 30 years. We no longer have busing for integration. We had the educational amendments of 72. Titles 1 through 9 were reaffirmed. Again, the bigots we're fighting that still. And then in 1974, Public Law 94-142 was passed. Again, I did not go to school with exceptional children. There were a few around. I just helped the custodian. But until 1974, and starting with the school year in 75, exceptional children could not come to public schools until the federal law changed in 1974. So that really shaped what our schools look like today. Now, we're going to talk about this on our EC night, but one of the biggest mistakes the principals make is not understanding how to deal with exceptional children in discipline. They don't want to do the manifestation termination, the DEC 5, functional behavior assessment, all the things that they have to do. So what they think is A, that only out of school suspensions count as a change in placement. No, the law is butt and seat. Even if they're in the same building, if their butt's not in their normal seat, that's a change of placement for an EC kid. That day counts against your 10-day total, but you have to do a manifestation to see if what the behavior is a function of their disability. And that's the first mistake they make. So ISS counts, OSS, bouncing them, moving them to a different room, all that counts as one of their days. The second mistake I see principals make most is they think they've got 10 days. You don't have 10 days if there's a pattern. What's the pattern? If the kid does the same thing the third time, kid does the same thing, regardless of what you did the first 2 times, they pass go, they collect the $200, they go straight into the manifestation termination, which is a functional behavior assessment, updated psychological, and updated PEP. All of that paperwork has to be done to determine if that kid is appropriately placed and if that activity, that those incidents are a function of their manifestation of their disability. But yeah, we've had exceptional children. We'll have a whole night on that. That one has really shaped us. Again, had another challenge to elementary and secondary act for low wealth kids. Again, in 75, ESSA was upheld, all the acts from 65. North Carolina responded like most states did in 84 with the North Carolina Basic Ed Plan, which really shaped what school looks like today. A Nation at Risk, somebody was talking about, it was 40 years old recently. Diane Ravitch, the Great Crusade, Nation at Risk. The Coleman report came out in 83 that said schools were going to hell in a handbasket. So in 84, North Carolina passed the basic education plan that said every child gets a basic education. That's going to be relevant when we do the Leandro case. And some smart guy in the back stood up and said, but what is a basic education? And all the eggheads said, we don't know. So it took them 5 years until 1989. And they wrote a standard course of study, a state curriculum, big, thick white notebooks for every course and every grade level. It took them 5 years to do it. And then some smart guy, and again, in the back stood up and said, well, how we know they get it? They said, here's the state curriculum. This is what a basic education is. And they was all patting themselves on the back, spraying their shoulders. And some smart guy in the back stood up and said, well, but how do we know they're getting it? So 1989 started accountability. That's when the first year I was principal, first year accountability, it was called performance-based accountability program, and then it became the state ABCs. And that's where we got state testing, report card, and all that stuff from, which is the law of the land now. It's what we do, make a good number go up, a bad number go down. That all started with the basic ed plan that every state put in about 1984, and then developed a state curriculum, and then developed an accountability program to measure whether that curriculum was being taught and learned or not. North Carolina, along the way, they tried, career status programs, differentiated instruction. They did all kinds of things to try to improve instruction. None of it ever stuck because they wouldn't fund it. We got all those things. In 1994, we had the Leandro case. It's 40 years. I was on the losing side. I was on the legal team for the Leandro plaintiffs. I'm still not bitter after 30 years. I'm not mad at all. It was a challenge to the flat grant funding formula in North Carolina. It was a national case. The plaintiffs wanted the state money to come based on the wealth of the district and not just same for everybody. Their example was the kids in Charlotte, the state was given $7,000, but the local was putting $4,000. So we were spending at that time $11,000 a kid to educate children in Charlotte and Mecklenburg. The low wealth counties were only getting the $7,000 from the state. They didn't have any local money to add to that because they were too busy trying to pay for their buildings. Remember when the state got out of the building program? So the low wealth counties that didn't have a lot of business or a lot of property taxes, they didn't have enough money to add anything additional to the actual per pupil. And so there was a discrepancy. So they wanted a district power equalizing with a recapture provision where basically the state gave you $2,000 less and you added the 4, and then they took your 2,000 and gave to the poor county. So in the end, you both ended up with 9 rather than the rich county 11 and the poor county was 7,000 per pupil. But I want you to be clear when we get to the Leandro case. The Leandro plaintiffs lost the case. We still have flat grant funding in North and South Carolina, which does not take into account local wealth. So that means there is even larger discrepancy today than there was 30 years ago on the amount per pupil spent in wealthy districts like Wake and Mecklenburg versus Hoke, Robinson, those that were the plaintiffs, Granville. They still can only spend what the state gives them and don't have any local money because they're having to pay for their buildings. And so that really defined schooling in the modern era in terms of per pupil and what we can do with kids. Again, as I said, the Capuchon lawsuit was to stop Swan from 71 30 years later, and it did. And so again, that's a national case, so it stopped busing, and so schools have reintegrated overnight in the last 23 years. It's been amazing. Of course, it was wiped out almost immediately. No Child Left Behind, as I said, that's why I prefaced that, so that when we got here, you'd understand what I was talking about. It says 2 things. Kids don't have to go to low performing academic schools or persistently dangerous. There's a calculation, there's incidents. If you exceed that point, 0.5% per year. So if you got 3,000 kids, you can have 15 incidents and you're okay. Versus if you've got 2,000, you can only have 10. Those are very punitive to school administrators. We attempted to bus the kids from Cochran to Ballantyne to J. Robinson rather than replace the administration at Cochran. We did that one time, and that was a fool's errand. After that, we just started firing principals. So your district is not going to pay to bus kids to a different school. They'll just replace you. The last 2 things that affect public education now are EVOS, where we're looking at teacher performance and value added. We're looking at growth now. As you know, proficiency scores on the report card, just about who you got, growth about what you do with them. We finally, it took us to 2010. It took us from, 1989, 2010, it took us 21 years to figure out proficiency is just about who you got. So now we're looking at growth. And we report that along with proficiency, which is a good thing. And then the last thing that really changed how schools look are vouchers and charter schools, which are a different vision of schools. Vouchers are public money for privates. Charters are public schools run as private schools. There were some things that came along in COVID, but that was just temporary. So that's what has shaped the law and policy and what school looks like today. And what we have to deal with. We'll have an EC case. We'll have a gender equity case because of Title IX. We have a grading case because that's the one you'll run up against most often. We'll have EC and FERPA, and we'll have Leandro because that's about the money. You'll begin to understand how restricted you are and how careful you got to be. And you can't put disparate sources of money together. You can't take federal and state and bundle them, those kinds of things, because all of these the Leandro case was lost. And that's another thing. There would have been a lot more freedom to move money and do things had the Leandro case, had the plaintiffs won that case. But in a flat grant funding formula, you have no discretion on how to spend those state funds. They got to track the kid, and it makes it really, really difficult to make ends meet financially because of the loss of that lawsuit. But those are the court cases that have shaped modern education and due process. How we have to discipline kids, have to have witnesses, witness statements. Kid gets to present their side of the case. We have, no arbitrary, no capricious. All those things, and so those are the laws that shape how we run schools on a daily basis. All right, I've told everything I know and some things that I didn't. It's now time for questions and comments, input.
Dr. Lamb.
This week, so y'all can talk next week. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 things on the case study for this coming week, when I click on the NCHSAA handbook, it says page not found.
Just okay. I'll find the new one and put it back in. The reason and I'm glad you brought that up. The reason I put that in is I've had students argue that it's the coach's fault. I'm like, what? Well, yeah. If they didn't have him practicing all the time, he had time to do his homework. There are rules on practice time. Number of days, number of minutes, how often, in season, out of season. Trust me, they are the most monitored people on your campus. It is not the coach's fault. Tommy, when you were coaching in Virginia, I'm sure y'all had a handbook up there as well. I mean, coaching is the most monitored thing that goes on in the school business.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the functions of your athletic director in Midland High School is to actually time how long practice lasts. If it says 90 minutes, it better not be but 90 minutes. So I've got the handbook because I've had people say, well, we just thought they went out and practiced anytime they wanted to, or until no, you can't practice or play on work days. Can't, Sundays. I mean, you get 90 minutes in season. I mean, it's amazing. In North Carolina, no spring football practice. I know in South Carolina you can, but even then there's very much restrictions on all that stuff. This is not the coach's fault either. But I'll put a new link into that handbook. It's a little orange handbook, but it's very detailed. And it says every in season, out of season for every sport, how many games you can play, participation, how many minutes you can practice, all that stuff. One of the things.
Sorry.
Go right ahead.
Did I miss where the location for the persistently dangerous?
It's in that handbook, as I said in
okay.
The one that I introduced the first week. Let me go back to that.
Okay. I did go back to week 1. That's fine.
Okay, so let me move this out of the way. I can close that. Okay, here is the handbook, but where I have it, and because I use it about every week. Unfortunately, I hate that. But right here is the last thing under week 1. I've got the fresh new one right here at the bottom. Disciplinary data manual right here. This is the law of the land on everything due process, how to discipline EC kids, alternative schools, how to report. Now, it's 145 pages long, and you saw it tonight when Danya asked her question. Great question. How do you know what to classify? It's got all kind of links back to other state laws. I mean, that is the Bible for anything.
I remember I downloaded it.
Yep, it is the Bible.
Okay. Thank you.
And it is very, very, very comprehensive. But it's got, it's one handy dandy. Not for nothing, I used to be the biggest customer for Ken Gaddis and DPI on disciplinary data when I was in charge of that for CMS. We wrote the original handbook. It was about 50 pages long. Now it's 150. Some 20-something years later, it's 150 with links in it. And we thought 50 pages that nobody'd read that. It's quantitatively larger than that now, but it has everything that you would ever need to know about all this stuff. It's a good one. It's a great question, though. Anybody in here coach, by the way? And Danya, you were nodding your head, yeah, and Letitia. Yeah, y'all know how y'all are monitored. Trust me, it's not the coach's fault. Now, I can't tell you that the kid wasn't playing travel ball or doing something like that, but that's not got anything to do with us. That's a big problem now. Is kids not having time for academics because they're involved in school sports, and then they're involved in travel ball as well. Travel ball is the bane of our existence in athletics anymore. It's awful. The little girl next door, it's a little girl, that's pejorative, isn't it? She's a grown woman now. She just finished her master's degree at University of Alabama. She did her undergraduate 4 years at the University of Virginia. Soccer player, pretty good one. She is my next door neighbor. I held her in my arm when she came home from the hospital 25 years ago. She's the only 2-time North Carolina Player of the Year in soccer, 2-time, at a 4AA high school in Charlotte at Huff. Full ride to Virginia, did her master's and played 1 extra year because of COVID at Alabama. national champ there. She's playing in Europe now. Tremendous player. Her travel team, you know where she played her home games for her travel soccer team? Phoenix, Arizona. Her mother would drive her to the airport and get on the plane with her in Charlotte and fly to Phoenix. And that's where she played her travel ball games, because she played for the national junior team. And their home games were played in Phoenix, Arizona. That's a little, but I mean, you can't believe how much money these parents spend on travel ball, and how involved, how many days, every weekend gone. They would fly out on every Friday afternoon and fly back home on Sunday night, remembering the time differential of 3 hours. And so they didn't get back in until usually about 2 or 3 in the morning for her to be back up and in school on Monday morning. She was a great student too. But how many kids are going to do that after they just flown in on the red eye from Phoenix? It left at 6 o'clock their time, but it's a 5-hour flight back because you're against, and then time you get through the airport and a 3-hour time differential, they'd usually come rolling in between 2 and 3 on Monday morning, and she had to be back in school. Remembering that high schools in Charlotte are early start. I mean, the bell to start class is at 7 o'clock. The bell to go to class is at 6:55 in Charlotte. We have all early start high schools because we triple the buses. And so she would usually get home about 3 hours before she had to be in class. So, but not a lot of kids, but a lot of kids do travel ball, don't get home till late on Sunday night, or, and involved during the week. And so yeah, that can happen. It could have been that he was too busy with this travel, but that's not a school coaching decision, because schools are monitored much better than that. And that's one of the problems I have with all these travel teams is nobody watching them. They overplay kids, overuse kids. Pitch count in games, that's ridiculous. They on the side, they throw more on the side than they do in the games. That's crazy.
Hey, Dr. Lamb, at least you know one club coach that doesn't do that.
Yeah, well, that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, I like anything that hooks a kid to school, athletics, clubs, or whatever. But it's got to be, we got to understand, but our core competency is teaching and learning. That's what we do in school. Yes, athletics is good, clubs and those things, but it's got everything, there's got to be some perspective here. And I'm
That's
afraid
why they're called student athletes, not
Exactly.
just athletes.
It's exactly right. I'm afraid many of these parents and kids have lost perspective. I won't argue that Bobby probably was spending too much time in baseball, but it wasn't the school coach's problem, because we monitor our business. We handle our business. But now these private clubs and teams, not so much.
So there is a group of parents in Charleston that opened a school called Oceanside. I don't know if y'all have heard of it, but it's essentially a school for athletes. So they're only required to be at school in person classes for about 2 to 4 hours a day. And the rest of the time, their schedules are built around their athletics. That's crazy.
Yes. And the problem with it is that they won't make those people wear signs or helmet, and I might have to engage them in society. Stupid people like that won't ever learn anything. That's the problem. I mean, you can be dumb, but just don't make me share in your idiocy. Don't let it rub off on me. I might catch it. I've lived too long. I've seen too much stuff. That to me is just nonsensical. I mean, that's just like these sports academies down in Florida. That's just crazy to me. And then those kids come out of that, and they are literally the village idiot. They don't know anything. They can't operate in society. They're functionally illiterate. They've not learned anything in school. What are you going to do now? I mean, just better hope daddy's money don't run out, or it's not going to go too well for you. But a society that has devalued education that much that's the bigger problem.
I have a question, Dr. Lamb, about
Yes.
that. When a child goes on those sports trips and all that, what would that be considered educational leave?
No.
Okay. Because I've
Your
had a lot
district's
of kids who
Yeah, the district has a policy on that. It has to be for an educational attainment or educational purpose. Parents will want to come and try to argue you down. No, those are not educational trips. There's not many things anymore that qualify for educational trips.
So it just goes against truancy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
attendance, and you know where that hurts you is in your average daily attendance when you get your state money. The state, it's calculated on a district total, but they subtract the number of days of absenteeism. They prorate your money. So if the state allotment is $8,000 a year, as I've told you, they don't send you 8,000 at the beginning of the year. They divide it up into 10 payments of 800. They pay you after the first month. You have to have money on hand. And then they subtract whatever percent that your district is in attendance violation, kids not coming, absenteeism, say it's 5%. They take 5% of your money. It's butts and seats, not how many is on the roll. So all those kids that are traveling for sports and missing school, you don't get paid for them that day. It really hurts everybody when they do that. That's why districts are going to have to start drawing the line on all this, allowing kids just, to act like it's a drop-in shower, come whenever you want to, kind of thing. Because it kills us on our funding. If kids don't come to school, the state don't send money for them that day. That's how the funding works. Modified accrual accounting system is the district has to pay for the first month and then you get it reimbursed, but you only get reimbursed for the kids who came. And you've set your budget up on the number of kids, that are on the roll to have that many teachers. That's how you have fund balances that come up short. Now, I think I've already mentioned this, I always get asked about charter schools. The money follows the kid. So if a kid starts in a charter school and he's there in the first month, they get the money. If he's back at your school the second month, you get the money. The money follows the kid. It's not true that all the money went to the charter school for the whole year for that kid, and now you've got them without it. That's not true. The money follows the kid. Unfortunately, if the kid don't come, there's no money to follow him. The bigger issue is not charter schools. It's absenteeism through athletics. That's your bigger issue. That's the one that gets you. That's one we ought to be screaming from the rooftops about rather than charter schools. We've made them the straw man in this, or the boogeyman. They're not. It's travel team and athletics that are killing us. That's the deal.
And it goes all the way down. It goes all the way down to elementary school. I had
Of course, yes.
two fifth grade boys miss a whole week in December going to Florida for their travel football championship team. And, they didn't need to miss, but they did.
There's somebody who is sitting here tonight with a sweater on, old man, because I'm drawed up. It's raining today after 17 surgeries. No kid ought to be playing football until you get to high school. That's the stupidest thing ever. I played with grown men with malice in their hearts. I can tell you right now, you'll regret every day I loved it every minute that I did it. I regret every day of it now. When I wake up, every morning when I wake up, it's what hurts today. What new surprise am I going to have today? I remember where I left that body part, or something's hurting, and I'm trying to remember, where did I hurt that one, or when did they cut on me for that? As long as I remember, that's kind of my Alzheimer's check. I remember why I'm hurting there today. That's kind of my assessment every morning when I get out of bed. I'm hurting here. That knee hurts. Oh yeah, I had that one scoped. That last time I had that one scoped, it's been hurting since then. Or this shoulder, or that we're allowing kids to play contact sport that young. Again, decline of Western civilization. We're just not too smart. The cost of healthcare now and the quality of it, which are both terrible. I'm just not sure why we're doing stuff like that. Soccer's bad enough, and it's supposed to be non-contact. but the way it's played now, it's a lot more violent than it used to be. I remember when I was first a middle school principal, and the first soccer match I ever went to was to watch the kids play, and they had it over behind isothermal. And, and I thought, well, this is not a bad thing. I'd rather watch paint dry than watch it, but it's not a bad thing because the kids weren't getting hurt. They were just running. And they were, the young kids are like ants. They just follow the ball. They don't play any position. I love that. They were having the best time ever, and they weren't getting hurt. But now soccer is become Americanized, and it's very aggressive. A lot of contact, and even especially they've done all this research on heading the ball, brain injury from that, CTE. But I'm just not sure about soccer. I am sure that football should not be played with until you're into later adolescence. Shouldn't be doing that. And I'm not sure, even then, if it's the right thing to do with all the head injuries that we have. I have a very good friend, even though, I have to explain. He went to Wake Forest, so I have to explain things to him. I have to talk louder and wave my hands more. He's not too smart. But, we were in a conversation the other day. He was a baseball and tennis guy, golf. And, I told him, quite seriously, my biggest fear is chronic encephalitis from all the head injuries. You can see them. I've got 3 scars on my head. One's 14 stitches, one's 11, and one's 8. So I know 3 times that I woke up later the next week because I still have the helmet scars on my head. We used to wear the old plastic liners before the air bladders. And if you got hit from the right angle and hard enough, that plastic band would just cut you like a razor. So I've got one here, and one here. Where that band went around my head, I've got 3 helmet scars where I got knocked out and woke up days later, basically. So I know. That's why I said I do my Alzheimer's check every morning. We shouldn't be letting kids do that. We just shouldn't. And not only for missing the school part, but for the health part, we're crazy. I mean, that's just insanity that we're doing that. We need to bring some sanity back to things, but everybody's crazy over football. I will say that everybody's crazy over football. But it's time and place. It's not for elementary kids. It's not for middle school kids. We ought to have more frank discussions about that in our society. I think it's a form of child abuse. All right. I will find the new manual and I will put it in that link. I hate that link's not working. We're supposed to have a detector that finds those things, but I don't think it's working. All right. I'm serious. Next week is the most fun I have all semester long. The first case study, which y'all gonna be first. I can't wait to see. I'll see you then. Everybody have a good week. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.